In this lesson, we'll start to add some more geometry to our pod, and we'll concentrate down here on the bottom section. Let's bring in a cylinder. So we'll create some geometry, standard primitive, and bring in a cylinder. And again, I like to use the keyboard entry. If you like to drag those out interactively, feel free to do that. So go ahead and bring this forward. Let's rotate this. So we'll rotate it 90 degrees. Okay, and we want to drop it down into the center here. And let's also take the radius down. So I want it to be fairly large, but I don't want it to be too big. So somewhere between fairly large and too big. So we'll change the height, raise the height up. We're going to have an additional piece back here. So I want this to actually be fairly long. Okay, so I'll kind of pull this back in. And I want it to be have a little bit higher resolution. Right now the sides are 9. Let's go ahead and set that up to maybe 24 or so. We turn on smooth. Okay. I think something like that would be good. Now I've got the cap segments set to 2, so I do have some geometry for the cap. Let's go ahead and I'm going to add just a few segments along the height before we do that. Okay, but then let's go ahead and just convert this to an editable poly. Let's go to our polygon subobject, and I want to do some shaping on this. So I'm going to select all the polygons here on this center point, or this center section here. Okay, now let's pull these out so we get something like this. And now I want to create some detail here. So we're going to do an inset. Okay, and let's, in my case it's 0.086, something like 0.1. We can go ahead and say OK to that. We can also do an extrude, and let's extrude this back into our object here. Okay, so we end up with something like that, and say OK to that. If we want to, we can get rid of those polygons in there. Now we're not going to be smoothing this, so we may want to come in and instead of smoothing, take the edges here. So just shift click and just chamfer those a little bit. There's segments, and there's our amount up there. 0.01 possibly. Say OK to that. Let's do the same thing up here. Okay, and now I want to add a little bit of detail here coming around the side. So I'm going to select these polygons, this whole loop, and I want to do an inset. Okay, but I don't want it to affect the whole group. I want to affect the individual polygons. So here where it says group, I'm going to say by polygon. And I'm going to take this down a little bit. So we end up with something like that. We'll say OK to that. Now we've got these individual polygons here that we can extrude out. Okay, and I'm actually going to extrude those out a little bit. So maybe 0.1 or so. Give us a little bit of interesting detail there. Oh, and you want to make sure that you say OK before you exit out of there. Okay. So you want to make sure to click that before you go. So that gives us a little bit of kind of mechanical detail there. And if we want to kind of move it back a little bit, we can certainly do that. We can also start to extrude some of the polygons back here. So for instance, we could come in here and select that. We can go do an extrude. If we want to make this a little bit larger, go by local normal, so that we can go in and out. Okay, and so just kind of have a little bit of fun with it. Extrude some of these pieces in. Maybe some of these are just not, you don't go all the way through possibly. So maybe you take some of these, and we're not going to be smoothing this, so you don't have to worry too much about that. So let's take this down a little bit. Okay, so something like that, where we just start to get a little bit of detail in here coming along the cylinder as it comes back in. All right, let's add another cylinder in here. Okay, let's get a new cylinder. Again, I'm going to just drop that in. Let's bring it in here. Let's rotate it down. Okay. And I want to take the radius down a bit and move it down inside this one. Okay. And we can go into our front view if we want to kind of line that up a little bit better. Kind of line that up in the middle. Can take our radius down just a little bit. Okay, let's take our height down. So we get something like that. We don't need a lot of that geometry that's going to be inside there. You can turn on edged faces. Okay, let's take our height segments down. And we'll take our height down as well. So maybe something along these lines. So something like that. And so let's go ahead and just make this an editable poly. We'll again select the same front part that we have here. And this time we'll just extrude this out to be kind of a thinner piece that's going to come out. So extend that out. Okay. Kind of extrude that out. And if we want it to get even smaller, we can say OK and then do an inset on that. So maybe 0.1 or so, maybe 0.15. Maybe I thought make that a little bit smaller. And then do another extrude and bring that out a little bit further. Okay, so maybe something like that. We'll say OK to that. Now we can take any of these edges that we want, and again, we'll just add a chamfer to those. Excuse me, can't talk right now. And so go ahead and add that, and we want to make sure that we take this down to maybe 0.02, maybe 0.03 or so. If you want to round it off, you can add a few more segments in there. And do the same thing here. Okay. And again, you can come in and go to your graphite tools, go to smooth 30 to kind of smooth that out. Okay. Now the pieces up here we can use half spheres for. So let's just drop a couple of spheres in here. We'll just drop one in to begin with. Okay. Let's bring this over, and the pole is up here, so let's actually rotate it. And it's in modify. We'll go ahead and just chop or squash it, make that a hemisphere. So maybe something like that. We can take our segments down, maybe 18 or so. It's going to be fairly small. Take our radius down a bit. Okay. Let's move this forward, and I just want to match this up along the center here. So we can come in and kind of match that up along the center of that. Take the radius down a little bit more. Okay, shift and drag this back to create another copy of it, and that gives you just some interesting detail down here. If we want to kind of make this, maybe make this black just for our own benefit, give that the gray color. Maybe both of these are the gray color as well. So a little fun adding some detail in here. Some mechanical type detail coming in underneath. All right. So once we've got this added, the next thing that we want to do is to add possibly some struts coming in underneath and connecting this up underneath this piece. It's a little bit more mechanical detail. And we can also start to add kind of a piece up here, add a little bit of detail there, and also maybe a larger piece underneath here. to kind of, instead of just making this completely flat on the bottom, give us a little bit of shape. So let's continue on. We're almost done here, just a few more lessons for the modeling portion, but let's continue on in the next lesson and add some of those struts in. So we'll do that next.